Hi CIS30A students. This week is week 2. We will go over the lecture for this week, but first, for this week we are to look at the notes and the videos. We are going to complete lab 2 and we are going to complete a quiz review. Next week you will have a first quiz in the class, so I want to make sure that you're ready for that. So the homework for this week also is going to be your quiz review. So to cover this week, you will go ahead and take a look at the notes. You can download the notes or view it inside the page. So in this week, we're going to talk about string methods, control statements, list, tuple, and dictionary. So to start, I wanted to touch on string methods. Last week we talked about numerical methods. This week we're going to touch on string methods. It's important because you're going to need to use some of the methods in order to write your project program. So to start, we're going to talk about string. String is simply just a set of sequential characters, and we know that in Python we can use the double quotation mark or the single quotation mark to indicate string. So in the example that you see here is I have a variable str1 and I assign it a string hello. And a second variable I have is str2 and I assign it world. So when we assign the string, we simply just have the single or the double quotation mark for the string. Now in this program, what you see is that we are using a concatenation. So we are concatenating two variables using the plus sign. And when you do this, your output will not include the space from one string to the next as you assign separate string for two separate variables. So when we print this, it will print hello world together without the space. Next, we're going to talk about how we can add the space to that. So in the next part here, if we print str1 plus, and if we wanted to add the space, you can add the double quotation mark and blank space to indicate the space in between the words. So it's going to come out to have two separate strings with the space. So to illustrate this in IDE, I have my Tawny open, and as I described earlier, here's the concatenation print. So we would print it with the plus sign, and that would not include the space from hello to world. The second print we have is with the space. We use a double quotation mark here with the blank space to add the space between hello and world. So this is what you see in the second print. Third, we are using a separator, and when you use a separator, you simply add a comma after each variable. And in Python, when you use a separator, especially with string, what you have is it automatically add in the white space. So when we print this, we print str1 comma, which is the separator, str2. What that will do is it's gonna actually add the space between the two strings. So here you can see this is 3 different ways to really print out your string as you assign to these variables, and so that way you can use it when you need to have an output or when you want to print for the user. Next, we're going to talk about using index in a string. As we mentioned earlier, that a string is a sequential group of characters. So what that means is really a string is put. So with the string, what we can do is we can look at the first character, and the first character here is P for Python. And we have the variable str3. We assign it Python as a string, so P is the first character. And this is at index 0. So when we start, the first index is always going to be 0. And so if we're indexing 0, we are actually only printing out P. And if we're indexing the next character, that will be 1, and that's going to cover the Y here. And the next one is going to be index 2, and it's T, and so forth. So from the first index to the end, the last character of the word Python, the string Python, what we'll have is we're going to be at index 5 for the letter N, and that's going to be the 6th letter in the string. Now we can also use negative index value. So from negative, simply we would start from the back. So the last character is going to be N, and that's going to be -1 index. So when you're using a negative index, you would start from the back, and it would start at -1. And as you move to the left, we're going to increase it by 1. So by the time you get to P, that will be -6. So we can actually print out each of the character in that string using index value. If you start from the left, the first character, that will be 0. If you start from the right, from the last character, that will be your -1. So in this case, as you can see, each of the index is assigned to the character here as I put in the table. So as you move down and you go through the notes, you would see that we can also use the length method. And the length method simply just allowing us to see the number of elements in that list. Or in the case of string, it would show you the number of characters in that string. So if we wanted to use the length for str3, which is Python, what will happen is it's going to show you that the length of this is going to be 6 characters. So from the bottom of page 1 going to page 2, as you can see, what we're doing here is we are using index, and we can use a range of indices that will be separated by a colon to print out a group of strings. So I'm going to illustrate that using Tawny. So here's my program. I had previously assigned the string Python to str3. This is my variable str3, and the string Python is assigned to it. As we previously talked about, we can print out the first letter using index 0 from that string, which is P. And when we run the program, as you can see, that will be P here. If we're using the negative index, we would start from the right. So if we wanted to print out the letter N, the character N, we can use the -1. So if I'm using negative index, I would start from the right, and so that will be -1. And you would enclose the index inside the square bracket. Next, we would do a range of characters in a string. So here we have the print method, and our string is stored in the variable str3. And we can go from 0. So when you don't see the index number here, the default for that will be 0 to the index 3. Now it's going to print from 0, 1, 2, and it's going to stop. So the 3 here is really a marker where it's going to stop the print at that particular index. So when I run this program, what will happen is it's going to print out P, which is the first one at 0, Y, which is the first index, index 1, and T is the next index, index 2. So it's going to stop right there at 3. It will not print the H as the marker is put on index 3. Next, I wanted to print from the third character, which is at index 2 to the end. So if you leave it blank here, what will happen is it's going to just default to the end of that string. So if we wanted to do that, we would do print the variable that stored the string, the index where you wanted to start, and then if you leave it blank, that will be the end of the string. Or if you wanted to go to a certain character, then you would put the index of that character there. So at this point, when we print, we would have T as T is the third letter in that string, the third character in that string. It's at index 2, and we're going to go to the end. So it's going to print T, H, O, and N. So that would be the end of the string here at the letter N. Next, we are going to print from the fourth index to the end. But in this case, what we're doing is we're not using the blank after the colon. We're actually using length. So what I did here is that I have another variable called substr4, and I assigned it. The way that this is created is that it is str3 from the fourth letter, which is the fourth character, to the end. So it's going to print from H, O, and N, and length just indicated the number of the string. So it's going to go to the end of that length of that string. And so when I print this out, I bring down the variable substr4. What I have is I'm going to print part of the str3 from the fourth character to the end of the length of str3. So what I have is I would have from the H, the O, and the N. As H would be the fourth character, O would be the next character, and N is the last character in that string. Now, what if we don't want to print the entire string and we wanted to skip every other character? So what I would do is I would have a start, a stop, and how I wanted for it to step through. So when I issued the print method here, I bring down the variable that stored the string. I would start with the index where it would start to print, where it ends, and how I want it to skip. So since we're going to print every other character, we wanted to put 2. So what it will do is it's going to start at P. It's going to skip the Y. It's going to print the T. It's going to skip the H. Then it's going to print the O. And it's going to skip the N. And that's going to give us the entire string and we're going to skip every other character. So this is what we have, PTO. Now, what if I wanted to repeatedly print the string 5 times? What I can do is I can simply bring down the variable that stored the string. I'm going to use the asterisk as it is the multiplication operator. So we're going to multiply this 5 times. So we wanted to print it 5 times. So I would put the number 5 here to allow it to print 5 times. And if I wanted to print 7 times, then I would put 7 here. And I simply use the asterisk to have it repeated. So as you can see, what it's doing here is it's printing Python, 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 Python. That will be 5 times. Lastly, for our print using string and indices, we want to print from the beginning to the end, and we can skip every 5 characters. So what we can do is we can use the print method, bring down the variable that stored the string. In the square bracket, what we want to do is if we leave this blank before the colon, that's going to default to 0. If we leave a blank again, that will be 0. So when it starts, it's going to start at 0, and it's going to end at the end of that string and how we want it to step through. So if you wanted to skip 5 every 5 characters, we would put 5 here. If you want to skip every 3 characters, you will put 3 here. So in this case, we're going to skip every 5 characters. So we want to put the 5 here inside the square bracket, and then we would close out the parentheses for the print method. So what that will do is it's going to start with the P, which is index 0, as it is blank here. And it's going to go to the end of that string, and it's going to skip every 5. So if you count that, there's 6 characters in Python as a string. Since it starts at P, it's going to skip every 5, and it's going to finish with the N, as N is the 6th character in Python as a string. And so therefore, it's only going to print P, N. So that concludes the portion for printing string using indices and also using the operator to have it repeated.